It was a new day at the school, and the excitement in the air was palpable. The students bustled around the hallway, hurrying to their next class, chatting with friends and laughing. Among them was a girl who stood out not because of her appearance, but because of the way she moved through the halls. She was quiet, almost invisible to most people. It wasn't that she didn't want to be seen, but rather she didn't feel like she belonged. The girl, who was known simply as the quiet one, often kept to herself. For her, school had always been a place where she could hide. She didn't mind staying out of the spotlight, avoiding the loud groups of friends and the popular kids who seemed to have everything figured out. They had the confidence she lacked, the kind that made them stand tall and take charge. She had never felt that way. On this particular day, as she walked through the school, her eyes wandered to the music room. There, in the corner of the room, sat a beautiful grand piano. The glossy black surface gleamed, and its ivory keys seemed to call to her. She had always loved music, but she wasn't the kind of person who would ever make a fuss about it. The piano was something that she had dreamed of playing, but she never had the courage to try. It seemed too big, too intimidating. But today was different. Today there was a sense of quiet courage inside her. She walked up to the door of the music room, her heart racing. She peeked inside, making sure no one was around. The music room was empty. The only sound, the hum of the air conditioning and the distant chatter of students outside. Slowly, she stepped inside, her feet hesitant at first but growing steadier with each step. As she approached the piano, her fingers itched to touch the keys. She had never really learned how to play. Music lessons were something her family could never afford. But that didn't stop her from imagining what it would be like to play. She had watched videos online of talented pianists, marveling at their skill and the beauty of the music they created. The girl took a deep breath and sat down on the bench. She ran her fingers along the smooth surface of the piano. It was cold to the touch but felt strangely comforting. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Should she just play something simple? Or should she attempt something grand, something beautiful? She settled on a simple melody she had heard once, a song that seemed easy enough. With a deep breath, she pressed her fingers down on the keys. The sound was soft, but it felt right. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could play something that would be beautiful. But before she could continue, a loud voice interrupted her. Well, 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 look who thinks she's a pianist now. The girl froze. She recognized the voice immediately. It was one of the popular girls from her class, the one who always seemed to be surrounded by a crowd of laughing friends. The girl walked into the room, followed by a few others who giggled behind her. What do you think you're doing? One of them asked, smirking. You're not even good enough to play something like this. You're just wasting your time. The girl's heart sank. She could feel the heat of embarrassment rushing to her cheeks. She quickly pulled her hands away from the piano keys, her fingers trembling slightly. The laughter from the group made her stomach turn. Why had she even thought that she could play something as beautiful as this piano? What was she thinking? I bet you don't even know how to read music, the girl said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Look at you sitting there like you're some kind of musician. The girl's face burned with shame. She wanted to run, to disappear, but instead she sat frozen, unable to move or speak. The laughter from the group echoed in her ears, each chuckle like a knife to her heart. She had never felt so small. Do you even know what you're doing? Another one of them mocked. You're just touching the piano like it's some toy. It's not for people like you. The words stung more than she wanted to admit. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the way they made her feel. Like she didn't belong, like she wasn't good enough. She tried to ignore the tears that welled up in her eyes, but it was hard. It felt like everything she had ever believed about herself was true. She wasn't special. She wasn't good at anything. She wasn't worth paying attention to. One of the girls made a show of rolling her eyes before turning to the others. Let's leave her to her delusions, she said with a laugh, and the group left the room, still snickering. The girl sat there for a long time after they left. She didn't touch the piano again. Her hands rested on her lap, still trembling from the experience. She had always known that she wasn't like the other kids, but this felt different. This wasn't just being ignored. This was being told that she was nothing, that her dreams were silly. She stood up and left the music room, her steps slow and heavy. She walked through the hallway, her mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. The laughter kept replaying in her head over and over again. She could still hear the mocking tone of their voices. As she reached her next class, she tried to push the thoughts away, but they lingered, heavy on her chest. She told herself that it didn't matter, that it was just a few mean words. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they were right. Maybe she wasn't cut out for something like that. Maybe she wasn't good enough to play the piano. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She sat quietly in class, her mind elsewhere. She barely heard the teacher's voice, barely noticed her friends talking to her. All she could think about was the piano and how she would never be able to touch it again. The thought made her stomach turn. She had wanted to learn. She had wanted to prove something to herself, but now it felt impossible. When the bell rang and she left school for the day, she walked home alone, her head hanging low. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, but one thing was clear. She would never touch that piano again. Not after what had happened. Days passed after the incident with the piano. The girl tried her best to push the painful memory aside, but no matter how hard she tried, it kept creeping back into her thoughts. It was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. Every time she thought about music, about the piano, she remembered the mocking voices of her classmates. It was as if their laughter had permanently etched itself into her heart. At school, she did her best to stay out of the way, blending into the background where no one would notice her. The last thing she wanted was to give anyone another reason to laugh at her. She focused on her studies, trying to drown out the thoughts of music and the piano. It worked for a while, but the emptiness never left. When she got home, things were different. She would enter her room and close the door behind her. Inside, she could feel a little peace. She had always found comfort in the quiet, in the solitude that her room offered. There, she didn't have to worry about the judgments or the cruel words of others. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk doing her homework, her gaze shifted to the corner of the room. The old dusty piano that had been there for as long as she could remember sat quietly in the corner. It wasn't a grand piano like the one at school, but it was still a beautiful instrument. It had been her mother's, a gift she had once treasured. Her mother had always been passionate about music, but after she passed away, the piano had been left untouched, a silent reminder of the dreams she had once held. The girl stared at the piano for a long time. She could hear the distant echoes of the music her mother used to play, soft melodies that filled their home with warmth. Her mother had always told her that music could heal any broken heart. But now the girl wondered if she could ever touch the keys again without feeling the weight of her own insecurities. For days, she simply stared at the piano, unsure of what to do. She wanted to play, to let the music flow through her, but the fear of being ridiculed held her back. She remembered the way her classmates had laughed at her, how they had made her feel small and insignificant. It was too much to bear. One evening, as the sun began to set, she found herself standing before the piano. She hadn't planned on it. It was as if something inside her was pulling her toward it. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then let her fingers rest lightly on the keys. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Her hands shook slightly, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she pressed down on a few keys, softly at first, unsure of what would happen. A simple, quiet melody filled the room, and for the first time in days, she felt a small spark of something. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was something. She continued to play, slowly at first, learning the simple melody by heart. It wasn't a complicated song, but it was one that brought her comfort. The more she played, the more she felt the weight of her insecurities begin to lift. The music didn't care about her mistakes. It didn't judge her. It was just music. And in that moment, she was reminded of how beautiful it could be. Over the next few weeks, the girl found herself returning to the piano each evening. She would sit down, her fingers brushing the keys, and let the music take over. Slowly, she began to teach herself more songs, her fingers growing more confident with each note. It wasn't easy. There were times when she felt frustrated, when her fingers didn't move as quickly as she wanted them to. But each time she played, she felt a little more at peace. The piano became her secret. No one knew about it. It was her private world, a place where she could escape from the pressures of school, from the fear of being judged. It was her sanctuary, where she didn't have to be the quiet girl who was afraid to be seen. She could be herself, just her and the music. She didn't share her progress with anyone. The thought of someone hearing her play, of them laughing at her again, made her stomach churn. So she kept her practice a secret, letting the music be the one thing in her life that was truly hers. She would play for hours, lost in the rhythm and the flow of the songs. It was her way of coping with everything, the loneliness, the self-doubt, the fear of never being good enough. But despite her growing confidence on the piano, the girl couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. At school, she was still the quiet one. She didn't belong to any group, didn't have the kind of friends who would support her. She often felt invisible, like she was living in the shadow of everyone else's loud, confident lives. One day, as she walked through the hallway after class, she overheard a group of students talking about an upcoming talent show. She had heard about it before, but the thought of performing in front of a crowd had never crossed her mind. The idea of standing on stage, being the center of attention, terrified her. She overheard one of the popular girls talking about the talent show with excitement. "I'm definitely going to sing," she said, her voice full of confidence. "I've been practicing all week. I know I'm going to win." The girl felt a pang of longing in her chest. She had always loved music, but the thought of putting herself out there like that was too much. She couldn't imagine standing in front of a crowd, being judged by everyone. It wasn't just the fear of failing. It was the fear of being laughed at again. She didn't think she could handle it. As the days passed, the idea of the talent show lingered in her mind. She couldn't help but wonder, what if she entered? What if she could share the music she had worked so hard to learn? It seemed impossible, but the thought wouldn't leave her. Deep down, she knew it was the only way to prove something to herself, to show that she was more than just the quiet girl. But the fear of being judged, of being ridiculed, still held her back. That night, as she sat at the piano once again, the girl made a decision. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew she had to try. She would enter the talent show. She would face her fears, even if it meant stepping out of her comfort zone. The music had become a part of her, and it was time to share it with the world, no matter how scary that might be. The decision to enter the talent show weighed heavily on her. Every time she thought about it, a wave of nervousness washed over her. The idea of standing in front of a crowd playing the piano, something she had always kept private, felt terrifying. She was still the same girl who had been laughed at in the music room weeks ago. Could she really do this? The days leading up to the talent show were filled with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She practiced every chance she got, her fingers slowly becoming more confident on the keys. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she made mistakes, when her hands fumbled over the keys and the melody sounded wrong. But each time she played, she felt a little better. The music was still hers, and no matter what happened at the talent show, that was all that mattered. The day before the talent show, she could hardly sleep. The thought of performing in front of her classmates made her stomach twist into knots. She tried to calm herself by focusing on the music, telling herself that it wasn't about winning. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of doing something she loved, even if it scared her. When the day finally arrived, she walked into school with a heavy heart. She kept her head down, not wanting to draw attention to herself. The thought of the talent show made her feel like an outsider, like she was about to step into a world where she didn't belong. In the morning, the school was buzzing with excitement. Everyone was talking about the show, who was performing, what they were going to do, who would win. The popular kids were making jokes and laughing, confident that they would steal the spotlight. But as the girl walked through the halls, she couldn't help but feel like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. When lunchtime arrived, she sat alone at a table in the corner of the cafeteria, trying to block out the noise around her. She watched as groups of students gathered, their laughter echoing in the room. The girl couldn't remember the last time she had been a part of that. She had never fit in with the crowd. She had always been the one who kept to herself, the one who stood on the sidelines while others took the stage. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice from behind her. It was one of the girls who had mocked her in the music room. "So, I heard you're going to perform in the talent show," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I guess you're going to play the piano, right?" How cute, the girl's heart sank. She had hoped that no one would remember that day, that the mocking would stop. But of course it hadn't. It seemed like everyone remembered. "Yeah, I'm playing," she said, trying to sound confident, though her voice shook. "Oh, well, good luck with that," the girl said, her tone mocking. "I'm sure it'll be interesting." The girl felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just nodded and focused on her lunch, wishing for the conversation to end. After school, the nerves continued to eat at her. The talent show was only a few hours away, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a huge mistake. What if she messed up? What if the audience laughed at her again? When it was time to head to the auditorium, she felt a lump form in her throat. Her hands were clammy as she walked through the crowded halls, her footsteps echoing in her ears. The auditorium doors loomed ahead, and with each step the anxiety inside her grew stronger. She couldn't turn back now. She had made a promise to herself that she would face her fears. But that didn't make it any easier. Inside the auditorium, students filled the seats, chatting excitedly and waiting for the show to start. The girl stood near the back, trying to blend into the shadows. She wasn't ready to be seen, not yet. She found a quiet spot to sit, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the first performers take the stage. One by one, students danced, sang, and played instruments. Each act met with applause. But the girl couldn't focus on the performances. All she could think about was her turn, her chance to step up on that stage and play in front of everyone. Finally, after what felt like hours, her name was called. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. There was no turning back now. She stood up slowly, her knees trembling. She made her way to the side of the stage where the piano sat, waiting for her. The spotlight shone down on the instrument, casting it in a soft glow. The girl hesitated for a moment, her hands shaking at her sides. She could hear the murmurs of the audience, the low buzz of conversation as they waited for her to begin. With a deep breath, she stepped up to the piano and sat down on the bench. The room fell silent. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, their expectations hanging in the air. She closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out everything around her. She focused on the keys in front of her, remembering the music that had become her escape. Her fingers brushed the keys and she began to play. At first it was soft, tentative, as though she were testing the waters. But with each note she felt herself growing more confident. The music flowed through her, each note coming more naturally than the last. The nerves slowly began to melt away as she became lost in the melody. For a few minutes, the world outside of the piano disappeared. There was no audience, no mocking voices, no fears of failure. There was only the music. She played the song she had practiced countless times, the one that had become her favorite. The piece was simple, but to her it was beautiful. It was her way of expressing everything she had kept hidden inside for so long. The self-doubt, the fear and the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could prove to herself that she was more than the quiet girl everyone had written off. As she played, she could feel the energy in the room shift. The murmurs of the audience had quieted, and now there was only the sound of the piano filling the space. Her fingers danced across the keys, her body swaying slightly to the rhythm. She wasn't just playing the notes anymore. She was telling a story with each chord, with each melody. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged. When the last note echoed through the auditorium, there was a moment of silence. The girl held her breath, waiting for the reaction. And then, as if on cue, the applause began. It started as a few claps, but it quickly grew into a thunderous wave of sound. The audience was on their feet, cheering and clapping for her. She sat there, stunned. The nervousness that had once consumed her seemed to vanish in an instant. It didn't matter that she had been afraid. It didn't matter that she had doubted herself. All that mattered now was the music, and the way it had connected her to something greater than the fear she had once felt. As she stood up from the piano, she felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the girl who had been mocked. She was the girl who had stood on that stage and played with everything she had. And for the first time, she truly believed in herself. The applause echoed in her ears long after she left the stage. The girl walked back to her seat in a daze, still trying to process what had just happened. She had done it. She had faced her fear and performed in front of the whole school, and the response was overwhelming. But despite the cheers and the clapping, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't quite belong there, like she was still the quiet girl who had no place among the loud, confident students who surrounded her. She sat in the back of the auditorium, trying to blend into the shadows once again, but this time it felt different. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had just taken the first step toward something bigger, something she had always dreamed of but never dared to pursue. But that nagging feeling of self-doubt still lingered. Could she really keep going? Could she continue to chase this dream when everyone had always expected her to stay in the background? As the talent show went on, she watched the other students perform. Some were good, some were great, but none of them made her feel the way her music had made her feel. There was a connection, a raw honesty in the music she played, and she realized that maybe that was the thing she had been missing all along. She had been hiding from her own potential, afraid of what people might think, afraid of being judged. The talent show finally ended, and the students filed out of the auditorium, buzzing with excitement about who would win and who had impressed the judges. The girl slowly stood up, gathering her things. She wasn't sure what to expect. Would anyone talk to her? Would anyone even notice her? But as she walked through the halls, something unexpected happened. A few of the students who had sat in the audience earlier stopped her. "You were amazing," one of them said, a girl she recognized from her math class. "I didn't know you could play like that. You really surprised us." The girl's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from people who usually ignored her. But this time it was different. The words felt genuine, like they really meant it. "Thank you," she said, a little unsure of how to respond. "I've been practicing for a long time." "I could tell," the girl said with a smile. "You've got real talent. You should keep playing. Don't stop." The words hung in the air as the girl walked away, her mind racing. It wasn't just the compliment that stuck with her. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she had always thought. Maybe people were starting to see her in a different light. But when she got home that night, the excitement from the day slowly started to fade, replaced by the familiar weight of uncertainty. The girl sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space in front of her. The house was quiet, and for a moment she felt alone. Her mother's old piano sat in the corner of the room, still and silent. The girl hadn't played it since the talent show, and now that everything was over, she wasn't sure what to do next. She thought about the performance, the applause, and the kind words from her classmates. It had felt good, but it also made her question everything. Could she really continue playing? Could she keep putting herself out there when the fear of failure still lurked in the back of her mind? What if she wasn't as good as they thought? What if she failed? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the fear was always going to be there. It wasn't something she could simply wish away. She had spent so much of her life hiding from it, trying to avoid the possibility of failure. But now, for the first time, she saw that failure wasn't the end. It was just a part of the journey. And maybe, just maybe, she had to face it head on if she ever wanted to truly move forward. The next day at school, the girl couldn't help but feel different. Her shoulders were a little straighter, and she walked with a bit more confidence. The reactions from the talent show were still fresh in her mind, and it gave her a sense of strength she hadn't felt before. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like the quiet girl who was afraid of being seen. She felt like someone who had accomplished something important to her. During lunch, she sat at the same table as before, but this time, she didn't mind the noise or the laughter around her. She wasn't trying to hide anymore. She felt like she had earned her place. And when a few of the popular students came over, she didn't shrink away like she had in the past. Instead, she looked up and smiled. "You were really good last night," one of them said, a boy from her history class. "I didn't know you could play like that." "I was impressed." The girl smiled back, feeling a sense of pride swelling inside her. "Thanks," she said, her voice steady. "I've been practicing for a while now. You should play at the next talent show," he suggested. "You could win for sure." The girl felt a spark of excitement at the thought. Winning wasn't what mattered, but the idea of performing again, of continuing to share her music with others, felt like something worth pursuing. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she was ready to face it. Ready to embrace whatever came next. The rest of the school year passed in a blur of new experiences. The girl continued to practice her piano skills, getting better with each day. She still had moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she was good enough, but now she didn't let those thoughts control her. She had learned that self-doubt was just a part of the process, and that it didn't have to hold her back. By the time the next talent show came around, the girl was ready. She didn't know if she would win or if she would even perform perfectly, but she knew that she wanted to give it her all. When her turn came, she walked confidently to the stage, sat at the piano, and began to play. The nerves were still there, but they didn't control her anymore. She had learned that it was okay to be nervous. What mattered was that she was playing the music she loved, for herself and for everyone who cared to listen. And as the music filled the auditorium, the girl realized something important. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about being true to herself, sharing her passion and never giving up on her dreams. The days after the second talent show passed in a blur. The girl had been nervous, but this time she had stepped onto the stage with a sense of peace. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or prove something to others. For the first time, she was doing something just for herself. And when the last note of her song lingered in the air, the applause that followed felt like a reward not just for her performance, but for everything she had gone through to get to that point. Walking off the stage, she felt different. The weight of the years of self-doubt, the fear of being judged, all seemed to melt away with each step she took. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being true to herself. And in that moment, she realized that she didn't need anyone's approval to feel validated. Her music was hers, and that was enough. The rest of the school year flew by. People no longer saw her as the shy, quiet girl who never spoke up. She had become someone who was willing to take risks, to face her fears, and to do what she loved. And slowly, others began to see her for who she really was. Not just the girl who played the piano, but someone with a unique voice, a passion for music, and the courage to pursue her dreams. Her classmates, the ones who had once made fun of her, now looked at her with a new respect. Some of them even began to approach her, asking for help with their own music. She wasn't sure why they had changed their minds, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had changed too. She had learned to believe in herself, and that was something no one could take away from her. One afternoon, a teacher asked her to stay after class. The girl was nervous at first, wondering if something had gone wrong. But when the teacher spoke, it was with kindness, not criticism. "I've been watching you over the past few months," she said, "and I have to say, I'm really impressed with how far you've come. You've become a role model for the other students, especially the ones who were too shy to step out of their comfort zones. I wanted to tell you that you have a gift and you should never stop playing." The girl felt a warm rush of pride at the words. She had never thought of herself as a role model. She had always been the one who stood in the background, afraid to be seen. But now, with a few kind words, she realized how far she had come. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore, she was playing for others too. And that felt even more rewarding than anything else. But the most surprising thing came from one of the girls who had mocked her during the first talent show. She found the girl sitting alone in the hallway one afternoon, looking uneasy. "Hey," the girl said, looking up at her. "I just wanted to apologize for what I said to you before. I didn't realize how wrong I was, and I admire how you've stuck with your music. It's amazing to see someone so determined." The girl was taken aback. She had never expected an apology, let alone one so sincere. "It's okay," she said, her voice soft but genuine. "We all say things we don't mean sometimes, but I appreciate you saying that." From that moment on, things were different. The girl's circle of friends grew, not just because she had gained recognition for her music, but because she had earned their respect. She was no longer defined by the laughter and mockery of the past. She was someone who had overcome her fears, who had the courage to be herself in a world that often tried to push people into boxes, and that made her stronger than she had ever imagined. As the year drew to a close, she sat alone in the music room, the soft hum of the piano filling the air around her. It was just her and the keys, the only place where she truly felt at peace. The school year had been full of challenges, moments of doubt, and triumphs. But as she played the familiar notes of her favorite song, she realized that none of it had been in vain. Every step, every mistake, every moment of fear had led her to this point. She thought back to the first time she had sat at the piano, so unsure of herself, so afraid of making mistakes. She had felt small, invisible, like she didn't belong. But now, as her fingers danced across the keys, she could hear the difference in her playing. It was smoother, more confident, and filled with emotion. And in that moment, she knew that she had found something important. Not just a talent, but a part of herself that had been waiting to be discovered. A few months later, she was sitting in a coffee shop with a friend who had also been in the talent show. The friend had just started to learn to play the guitar, and they were talking about their shared love of music. "You know," the friend said, "I've been thinking, we should start a band. You play the piano, I'll play the guitar, and we can get a drummer. It would be amazing." The girl's heart skipped a beat at the idea. A band, it seemed like such a huge step, a huge leap forward. But for the first time, she didn't shy away from the idea. "Yeah," she said, smiling. "Let's do it." And that was how it all started. What began as a shy, uncertain girl playing alone at a piano became something much more. Together, they started playing small gigs around town, sharing their music with anyone who would listen. It wasn't easy, and there were still plenty of doubts along the way. But it was the start of something she had only dreamed of before. She was part of something bigger now, something that she never would have imagined just a year ago. Looking back on everything, the girl realized that the journey had been worth every moment of uncertainty. The moments of self-doubt had led to growth. The fear of failure had been the push she needed to keep going, even when things seemed impossible. And the music had been the constant thread that tied it all together, a reminder that sometimes, the things we love most are the things that can help us find our way. She had started the year afraid, unsure of where her place was in the world. But now she stood with her head held high, not because of anyone's approval, but because she had learned to believe in herself. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest gift she could pray